This is an in-station training exercise and focuses on some critical decisions that may be necessary when responding to structure fires. And in this particular case, we're looking at apartment fires, and they present a considerable challenge due to potential life hazard and multiple attached exposures. And then that becomes magnified when the first arriving companies have persons reported. And I'm sure that this is going to lead into some good discussion because our standard operating guideline on rules for engagements indicates that we'll accept a greater level of risk to protect savable lives. But it also says that we have to base action on current and expected fire behavior and structural stability. So these two guiding principles intersect when you arrive at a fire and say you're presented with a report of a trapped child. So you have to be able to resolve those things right quick and in a hurry so that you can put an effective plan of action into place.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, yeah. So our learning outcomes are that firefighters and officers will be able to effectively apply the rules of engagement when they're confronted with persons reported in a structure fire, whether it be an apartment or a house or some other type of building. So this particular incident involved a fire in a small two-story garden apartment complex at 4315 Union Ave in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, 9 o'clock in the morning on March 7th, 2018. And in order to kind of have a sense of place, I've got a map and some photos of the area before the fire. So in the map, you can see where the fire is on Union Avenue. There's hydrants along that fire hydrants along that street. One of them's within about 200 feet, and in the direction of travel of the first arriving company. The apartment that had the fire was in a complex of several similar buildings along the south side of Union Avenue. So this is an aerial view, and as you can see, there's 3 buildings in a row that are very similar, and then some additional buildings over here to the west that are similar in nature. Other buildings in the neighborhood. There's another apartment building, and then there's single family homes on the other side of the street. So this is a view of the building that had the fire. It's a small 2-story garden apartment, and the designation garden apartment means that the units are all accessed independently. It does not have a common hallway, and as you can see in the photo, it's got a stairway that goes up and then across the second floor that provides access to the second floor units. The fire occurred in the end unit on the first floor, and the standard convention that we use is that the address side or the street side is alpha, and then we give alphabetic designations going clockwise. Alpha is the front, Bravo would be the left side if you're looking at the front, Charlie would be the rear, and Delta would be the right side. So in this case, we've got a building that's got 6 units. They run front to back. And again, as I said, the fire occupancy is the end unit on the Bravo end of the building.
What would that be an established norm in the United States, or that you would say first A, B, C, D, and second one is first floor always ground floor?
Yeah, that's again a different convention than is typically used in Europe. We would say that the first floor is the ground floor, and then the second floor is the next floor above that, as opposed to ground floor, first floor, second floor, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, just in Sweden, we use both, which is a problem.
Yeah.
And the fire service, not even my own fire service I worked for, had standardize that. So it was always confusion.
Yeah.
I tried to fix that, but the chief said, "Well, it's too much work to do it, so we're not going to do it."
And one of the places where that becomes kind of a big deal is if you have a different number of floors on one side of the building than another, or if you have a basement level that's a walkout basement. So when you go around to the back, maybe it looks like there's 3 stories. We would still say that's if it had that, it would be 2 stories with a walkout basement. So we try and keep that as clear as we can.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work out, but most of the time.
Well, at least it's a lot better than having no system.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay, go ahead.
And so here's a view of the Alpha Bravo corner, and as you can see, there's no windows on the Bravo side. So the only windows in this unit are on the front and in the rear. And there's no ground level view of the rear of the building, only an aerial photo. So it's a little bit difficult to tell what's back there.
It seems like a couple of windows and pretty much free, no obstacles go around the building and so on.
Yeah, it appears to be pretty clear both from the 3D aerial and also the 2-dimensional aerial photo.
Yeah.
So the story, and I tried to make this as consistent with what actually happened in the incident, with the exception of staffing. The staffing that I wrote into the case is based on what we would typically have, but anybody that was picking this up and wanting to think through it, you can apply any level of staffing at any time's arrival that makes sense in your own organization. So as we presented this to our guys, they're responding to this incident as the company officer or a firefighter who's acting in capacity, whoever's in the right front seat of the first driving engine, and they have a crew of 3, a driver, officer, and a firefighter in the back. Initial dispatch indication indicates that there's a 2-year-old child trapped in the fire occupancy. So they knew that when they were dispatched. You're responding from the west on Union Avenue. Wind is from the west at less than 10 miles an hour. And then there's another engine with 2 people that will arrive from the opposite direction within 4 minutes, and a command officer will arrive 2 minutes after that. So we based this on 6 people. There's a relevance to the number 6. Before the command officer gets there, we require 5 people to conduct offensive operations, very similar to in Sweden. The differences in their assignments for the 5 people, it's 2 in, 2 out, and a pump operator. Once a command officer gets there, then we require 6 because we want the command officer to be focusing on that job and the pump operator to be focusing on theirs, and that provides us with 2 in and 2 out. Now there's an exception to that we'll get to as we get a little bit further in the case. When you have persons reported, our state's safety standards for firefighters, occupational safety and health regulations, they will allow us to operate with 2 inside and 1 outside in a case where immediate action can save a life. So that's a variation on the theme, again, that can't just be used willy-nilly every time you go to a fire, but if you have specific information, then at least it is legal for you to do that.
Legal, not always recommended.
Yes. A big difference. I mean, there's several issues as we start to look through this case. One of them has to do with, are you compliant with occupational safety and health regulations? One of them is the moral issue of saving a life if you have the ability to do so. The other issues have to do with tactical capability of your crew and fire conditions and all of the other things that get rolled in, and the need to make a decision in a timely manner.
I mean, we're going to get to that discussion, but I think it's important. Sweden, long time ago, made the decision to make it a law that you need to be 5 persons regardless to go inside a smoke-filled building.
Yep.
And I think it was, I wouldn't say it a mistake, but I would say that it's got a lot of unfortunate amounts of repercussions. But we'll get to that. It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and for me, I started in the fire service a long time ago, 43 years. And when I started, we didn't have that regulation. And we didn't have, in fact, we didn't have any regulation at all that said about what we could do or not do. And sometimes we did things with good effect, and sometimes we did things that maybe weren't quite so smart. And today we have some constraints on that. But again, it really comes down to trying to balance all of these things and make good and timely decisions. So
you would need regulations if everyone knew absolutely everything they needed to know, so then they could make their own decisions.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I try and encourage our firefighters and officers to do is to begin the process of size up long before they even get dispatched on the call. And part of that is paying attention to what's in your patch. What kind of buildings, what's the neighborhood like, what kind of conditions do you encounter? If you're going there on some other type of a call, a medical response or some other type of thing, to pay attention to that, because that information will become valuable once you get dispatched to an incident. So in this particular case, thinking about critical factors that you would consider when you're dispatching during response, and what conversations you'd have with your crew. I mean, it starts off with, before you leave the station, making sure that everybody knows this is where we're going, this is the route that we're going to take to get there. All the compartment doors are on the rig, everybody's seated and has seat belts on, all compartment doors are closed, and the overhead door in the fire station is all the way up before you go out the door. So that's kind of a beginning place. During response, probably having some conversation about water supply in the area. Are there hydrants there? Are they closely spaced, or are they far apart? Is the water supply good? Again, thinking about the staffing level of 3, and responding when you have a unit on fire and persons reported. Question of whether you would stop at the fire hydrant and lay a supply line and leave somebody at the hydrant to make the connections, or whether you'd simply lay the supply line and not leave somebody at the hydrant. That could be done by a later arriving resource or by the pump operator later in the incident, or whether you wouldn't stop at the hydrant to lay a supply line at all. And I think for our guys, it's less likely that they would do the latter. I think they would probably stop at the hydrant, wrap the hose around it, and lay hose to the fire, because in a combination staffed organization such as ours, the time of arrival of the next company is really unknown. In this case, we told them how long it was going to be, but in reality, you probably wouldn't know. So that would probably be some of the things that would be a conversation that would take place while the crew is responding, as well as anything that we knew about this complex. If we'd been here before, okay, there's small apartments, there's a door in the front, there's no windows on the sides, there's windows in the back, whatever types of things like that we might have. If we knew whether or not or the second floor, what sort of access issues we might need to think about, and the like. In this case, it was on the first floor, so pretty straightforward.
Can I roll back? Yeah, we'll roll back that. So you talked about connecting to hydrants. So what would you be giving your area you work in and organization? When do you anticipate that they will connect to a hydrant before they actually roll up to the house? Like what would you say, like, these are the typical scenarios that I would see people connecting to a hydrant before they roll up?
I would, and again, the interesting thing with our district is that 25% of the area has hydrants and 75% of it doesn't have hydrants. So in areas where they're going to need to say go off the road, if this building was set back from the street to a parking lot and so forth, at a minimum I would figure they would be laying hose from the street so that the other companies wouldn't need to come all the way in there and jam the lot up. In this case, it's on the street. My expectation would be that almost always that they would lay hose, not necessarily that they would leave somebody at the fire hydrant to make the connections, but that they would lay hose down the road, unless they were close enough that they could hand stretch hose back to the hydrant if they needed to do that. And
how do you justify that time delay? It is a time delay. When you have, how much water do you have in your tank or your engine?
700 gallons.
700 gallons. So that's about the same as a Swedish fire engine, maybe a little bit more. I mean, Swedish system, you never ever stop to connect to a hydrant or lay a hose to a hydrant before you make a fire attack, ever. I mean, like special occasion, that's a massive fire, maybe, I know, but not even then. It's always done on tank water.
Well, I think one of the factors that may impact on that is the design of the apparatus. In that, as I understand, in Swedish fire engines, the supply hose is kept rolled up.
Oh yeah, it's not designed for that system at all. But it's still a time delay, even if you were to.
In this case here, if they're simply going to wrap the hose around the hydrant and drive down the street, it typically is going to be somewhere around 30 or 40 seconds for them to get out, wrap that around, and get back on the rig and go down the road. So it's not a huge time delay.
It's still a time delay.
It is.
And 30 seconds is a long time. I would say it's a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just saying that, like, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm saying that what's your justification for doing it? Because if we're talking rescue, would you need 700 gallons a minute to achieve a rescue?
Well, I think in this case here, I would not argue with the company officer if I arrived and they chose not to do that, and the hydrant is reasonably close. I would be okay with that. Again, one of the challenges is in a lot of cases the distance to a hydrant isn't 200 feet; it's 400, 600, 800 feet, and that's not something that you can do by hand. So really, it comes down to thinking about the context. We would prefer that the first arriving company take care of their own water supply, however they're going to do that, unless they're in an area with no hydrants, then they're going to use water tenders, in which case the first arriving water tender is their water supply. But again, some of this is driven by the fact that wood buildings, if the fire gets out of the unit that's currently involved, then you're going to need some more water supply, and it's far better to have it not need it than need it and not have it.
Well, that's not true. It comes with a price. The price in this case is 30-40 seconds.
Yep.
That's a price. So it's always a price. There's no free lunch here.
No.
And I can't. Well, if I'm gonna have an opinion, I don't think I can. I don't think I can agree on that. I think it's rare that especially if there's a known rescue, especially in that case. But I wouldn't do it anyway. That time delay is still a time delay. Just you leave it to the next arriving engine or tank, whatever it might be, to fix the supply of water. But that goes maybe also to the Swedish system, where basically the first arriving engine, everybody works from that engine, unless they go in from maybe a different place in the building. But everything would happen to their engine. So the second engine would come in and they would just support the first engine. Basically just connect that first engine to a hydrant.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than taking their own engine and working from that. I don't know if that makes a difference, but you, from my perspective, you would minimize the time needed to get into whatever first actions you're going to take on the fire ground. And I think that for rescue, but also for fire attack, if it were to rescue, I think the tank water there's a lot of water in the tank. And if you haven't figured out, if you haven't solved the problem on tank water, you have a fairly big problem. And if you arrive to that one, if it is already 4 houses alight, and you're at that, oh sure, connect to a hydrant and drive forward, because you really know that you're going to need massive amounts of water fast. But most fires, you don't need massive amount of water fast. You maybe need like a lot of water, but you only need it for a very short period of time. So still, tank water is enough. But I don't know, because I can't understand why the guys for calls, when I look at American Fire Service, it's so common that this is the place. It's very few departments I've heard about that says we regularly only deal with tank water, unless it's a rural department where you have to go tank. But like even if there is a hydrant system.
Well, the agency that I work with before I move where I am now, it was almost always the first engine went right in and operated off tank water, and the second engine took care of water supply. The difference in the two agencies had to do with how long is it before you would see the second engine, and is there certainty that second engine is going to be the one that you think it is. Where I worked previously, the second engine typically would arrive within 3 or 4 minutes, and it would have the same number of people as you had on the first engine. In the context that I'm in now, it could be that engine arrives within 3 or 4 minutes, or it could be that it's 15 or 16 or 17 minutes before that next engine arrives. And that could make a difference, particularly if when you're dealing with lightweight wood buildings and things like that. So I think there's an argument that can be made on either side. I think if it's a contents fire in a single unit, I would agree with you that tank water should be sufficient to deal with the immediate problem. If it's gone beyond that, then again, I think the challenge is not so much the need for massive amounts of water, but probably the difficulty in getting the water where it needs to go may complicate things a little bit.
Well, and I agree. I mean, when it goes out from one compartment, especially one building, now we're starting to need that water. But my perspective is always like, if we can't handle it in the first 5 minutes, like 95% of all the fires we handle in the first 5 minutes, like the bulk of the fire, whatever it might be, like you whack it and then it's pretty much out, and there's overhaul and so on. But like that's most of the fires, at least in my context. And you optimize for those 95% of the fires and make sure that they are handled as efficiently as possible. And when that's not the case, you arrive to a big, the sky is on fire, reports saying a whole house and the next one is burning too. That's the 5% of fires, at least in my context, and then it's justified to go to tank to hydrant first. At least that's how I would perceive it. Otherwise, you're kind of planning for failure, and by planning for failure, you're actively increasing the chance or risk of failure. Because again, now let's say 30-40 seconds, some might argue that's a non-issue, that's like the punishment for that action. I would say sometimes maybe it's more, sometimes maybe it's less, and so on. But still, that's still to me a half a minute that could go on to just standing outside the building, just judging what would be the most optimal outcome. Or if you have that optimal outcome decided, just go ahead and do the actions you have intended to do.
Okay.
You don't agree with me?
No, I think that in a urban context where I had a certainty of the second arriving company in a timely manner, and in that circumstance, I think I would agree with you 100%. If the hydrant is close, and we would say that's maybe 100 feet, 150 feet away, no, we wouldn't stop and lay hose in, because the pump operator can do that after the rest of the things get dealt with. As the length of lay goes up and the uncertainty of when that next arriving company is going to arrive, that's where for me it becomes pretty important that we take some initial steps to deal with that. And I think a lot of that probably comes down to experience with this particular kind of building and construction and so forth, where extension beyond the unit that's involved is fairly common, whether it be overlapping out the window and gets up into the attic or the floor above. That's probably the most significant direction of spread.
But let's if I ask you this question, let's say that even if in this case, even we know that there's one engine arriving, there's no other engine arriving at all, like nobody else is coming. Let's just say that. So we actually know that there's just this one engine. I would still go to tank water, because I would say that, well, we're going to make one push to see if we can save, in this case, a reported child. And if we can't, we're going to back off. We can lay the supply line and we try to protect exposures. But we're going to make that push, and we're going to aim everything we have on that push, on that chance of saving that reported person. Now, if it wasn't a reported person, if the indication was from the beginning, like, oh, we everybody's out, that's reported, everybody's out. Now, if I knew that there's no engine coming whatsoever, or like you said, there's a large uncertainty as to when the second arriving engine will arrive. Now I might see that, okay, this makes a lot of sense to connect to that hydrant first. We got 30, 40 seconds or a minute, whatever it might be. That will be well spent time in the second run. But again, then you're like planning for it to spread from the first occupancy, next one, and you're planning on handling that big fire. And if you don't, I'm saying you're planning to make, basically, I'll try to make a snatch grab, or make a really hard attack on the fire and the occupancy to make a quick search and then back out and let the stuff burn. I think there's especially when you have a reported person, I can't say that I could support not going there by tank water, just spending time on connecting to hydrant in either case.
Yeah, well, the option that I suspect that our guys would do is they would not stop and connect to the hydrant. They would just simply wrap the hose around it, leave it, and continue to the fire. So not taking time to connect, not leaving somebody at the hydrant, bringing their whole crew with them, but saving the time and the effort that it would take for the pump operator to try and get that hose line back there if there was a delay in other companies arriving. So big difference in impact if the company left somebody at the hydrant to make those connections and to charge that supply line once the engine got to the fire. Now you're arriving with two instead of with three, and there's a delay of the person getting there and so forth. But
I would understand. Like connecting to hydrant that's a slow process. Even in Sweden, it's even more so. Our fire hydrants are in the ground. You have to like remove a hatch and then connect like basically a standpipe, a short standpipe into the ground, and then connect the hose line. So it's a very slow process to do that.
But I would agree with your assessment that if this is a contents fire, couple of rooms, absolutely, there's enough water in the fire engine to be able to darken this down and get in and affect the search. I guess the piece where we have a difference of opinion is on that time that it would take to stop at the hydrant and secure the hose and leave.
Yeah, I think maybe that's it. I mean, and maybe some like you said, like the penalty. Let's say it's 30 seconds just to make it. Jump out of the vehicle, grab a hose line, wrap it around the fire hydrant, and jump back on. Let's say it's 30 seconds. I would think it's more something a lot of times because of distance, and then when you're driving and so on, you're driving with a hose dragging and so on. You can't really drive as you did before. You're a little bit limited as to how you can place your fire trucks. Maybe not limited, but restricted, maybe a better word, and so on. I think there's more penalty than 30 seconds. But just for the simplicity of the argument, say it's 30 seconds. I would still say that for that the penalty of 30 seconds, I don't think is worth it when reported persons are missing. I think we should maximize. So that might be the difference of opinion, which is fun. Then it's a gray area, of course, and I would say if I were in your jurisdiction, I know that the second arriving engine is very uncertain. Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? And so on. I would also say if there's no person reported missing, I would probably I could probably support that you would wrap it around the hydrant and do that stretch to make sure that when the second arriving engine or whoever, maybe it's a tank or a command unit, whatever, if the commander actually does something practically sometimes, that they would connect it to the hydrant and then supply water. So I think that I could support that.
And this one is probably on the edge of where we would say that the engine is on a hydrant. The hydrant is 200 feet away, more or less. We have some pump operators that could stretch 200 feet of 5-inch hose back to the hydrant. That will take a little while, but it can, like as you say.
It's a heavy hose to drag.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that case, it doesn't make it enough. Like rolling hose is not like for that amount. It's much easier. You just run out and roll it, connect it, and then I would say that when it gets longer distances, the rolled hose is much more efficient.
More efficient.
Oh yeah, more efficient than having a pre-connect. But the pre-connect is only like 200 feet usually. How long a pre-connect do you have for the hydrants? But you could drive that out. So it's like
it's not pre-connected. It's
just a hose bed. Sorry.
Yeah,
it's a hose bed.
It's got 1,000 feet.
Yeah, and you can drive that out, so it's not you're not actually pulling it out. That would be like what would you say is like for a 5-inch hose, like pulling it out? You said 250 meters, 250 feet, like that.
Well, probably 200 feet would be the outer limit unless your pump operator is really pretty stout.
Yeah. Well, I'm just rolling my head. No, I mean, the European fire trucks should have hose beds. Maybe not. I would maybe not go to the exact configuration as most Americans, but Swedish fire trucks should use hose beds. It's just much more efficient in a lot of ways. But that could be a different argument. So let's go. So we talked about hydrants here and connected to hydrants. That was a lot. And this so we also talked the second one. We talked about connecting to hydrant, and the other one we talked about. You talked about what your anticipation in the fire truck was something else. I don't really recall. But anyway, so jump on to the first assignments prior to arrival.
Okay, well, prior to arrival, it's fairly straightforward in that the apparatus operator is going to be taking care of operating the apparatus. The firefighter. In this case here, if we choose not to leave them at the hydrant, we're just going to either drive directly to the scene or wrap the hydrant and lay hose. That means all 3 members of the crew are on the rig, and the firefighter, their first task more often than not is going to be to stretch a hose line to get water on the fire. So would
you have them mask on and mask off in this incident?
Standard practice would be mask off, and they would mask up once they stretched the hose. So they would stretch the hose near to where they were going to operate, call for water, and mask up.
How long would you anticipate masking up would take?
Probably 30 seconds.
Would you say that's a happy number, or would you say that that's like an average in your department?
No, I would say that's probably an average in our organization. There might be a few people that would take a little bit longer, but we probably also have some people that would be a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
it's not prohibited for them to come off the rig with their mask on, but it typically is not done because it does reduce your visibility when you first arrive on the incident.
So would be your biggest push against, or biggest argument against having the mask on in the rig would be lack of visibility?
Yeah.
That would be your major argument. I know. Yeah. I would support that. That's the major argument. I would just support. I would just have a different opinion that I would still have them on, and that goes back to like if you have, like if you add 30 seconds on stretching a hydrant, and then you add 30 seconds on masking up, now you got a minute. Yeah. And that's to me that's a massive amount of time you just took away from that potential rescue. And I was so there are this, and I'm not hard against, like I don't, when I teach, I don't teach well, you got to have your mask on when you come to the fire truck, you got to have it off. There's many departments in Sweden have it off, as many departments have it on as like a standard. So I don't even know if there's like a, you could even say it's 50-50, but and I don't teach anything on and off. I'm just saying that when you, for instance, it's this occasion when we have a person reported, we know it's a ground floor, and so on. That's I would say that my opinion is the crew commander in that fire truck or captain of that fire truck. I would say you're going to have your mask on. At least the two firefighters in our context is going to be first inside, to not have that time penalty, because I guess in our equipment it would also, which also add to that, it would probably not be 30 seconds. It would probably be a minute. Close to a minute to gear up, because we don't have it just takes a long time, especially if they have the exterior hood and so on. You have to wrap it around. So that of course adds to my opinion. But even if it were in American gear and 30 seconds would be like an average time, I would be hesitant to say that have them masking up at the scene.
Yeah, no, I understand. It would kind of change my perspective a bit if we had the clip-on mask like the Belgians and the Germans.
Oh, that would no brainer. No brainer.
Then the time frame is just a few seconds.
Oh yeah, 5 seconds. It would solve everything. But I tried to get my department to buy them, and they were like, "Well, why should we? Like, that's stupid." like firefighters always say about everything until they've tried it. So I didn't have the energy to fight for it. Like John McDonough, I know he's tried like New South Wales to get them to buy them, and he's like, "Oh, I don't have the energy to fight that." But anyway, so that would negate that argument. But at least I would say in my context, I would probably be on mask on in that case. For the two firefighters going inside, then we have like a door person, which is kind of like the boss of the firefighters, but the door person would probably not be they would probably have the mask off, for, like you say, better visibility, a better communication, and so on. And then you have like otherwise I would do exactly the same. One firefighter is prepared to whack the fire, regardless if it's a rescue or not. That would be my first priority. As at least in the fire truck, that might change, but in the fire truck would be given, and the pump operator helping to supply the firefighter with a hose line. So that would be the same.
So, and this is more or less conditions on arrival. The window and the door have either been opened or failed, and so you've got what appears to be one room that's well involved in fire, and then smoke throughout the rest of the occupancy. And again, I think the thing with this, quick water on the fire, and darkening that down so that access can be made for the search would be my expectation.
I agree. I mean, getting water on that fire would be my absolute #1 priority. Now, let's say, what would your anticipation be like if you had like a magic wand? How do you like to talk nozzle streams and cone angles and such? How would you anticipate them, or not anticipate? How would you do this if you were the nozzle operator doing that first initial hit on this fire?
I guess in this particular instance, the first thing would be a straight stream above the door to kill the fire that's burning on the underside of the deck, so it wouldn't be over my head, and then moving up to the doorway and making an indirect attack from the doorway with a narrow fog pattern, which would be atypical of what I think U.S. firefighters would typically do. I think they would be more likely to use a straight stream, steep angle off the ceiling, which would also work. But I think either of those two options would be a viable way to darken this body of fire down.
I agree with you 100%. Especially like you said, if you whack that fire a bit above your head, make sure it doesn't spread. Also, it's like a 2-second job. And
Yep.
then you just, since you don't have a lot of fire coming out, you can move basically into the doorway, whack that stream around. If you do it with a fog, that's going to be the fastest way of darkening that fire down.
Yep.
But if you were to do it with a straight stream, if you're fear of getting air and train in that stream and so on, I don't have a problem with that either. Either way, it's going to work fine probably. Now, the most interesting thing about that is what kind of effect are you getting? Because from this angle on, I don't know if there's any extension to the backside. I don't know if there's extension to other rooms. And if that is the case, your first hit is not going to be as successful.
Yep.
If you have fire extension, so you need to hit both of those rooms in that case. But from what I'm looking here, you said, like you said, on the left window here, we got just
smoke.
A lot of smoke, probably not a lot of fire in that compartment, probably a secondary compartment. So if you knock that main body of fire down, that's probably going to be a non-issue.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the one thing that I would mention about using the fog pattern for indirect attack in the doorway is that air entrainment's a much bigger deal if you're away from the building.
Oh yeah.
And then filling that opening up. And in this case, because there's not a lot of fire coming out of there, and you can approach the door or the window fairly easily, I would put the nozzle inside the opening, and that would reduce any potential impact of air entrainment. The other deal with that is that if you don't operate the nozzle for that long, you're not going to have that much air come in, and I don't anticipate that this would take more than 8 or 10 seconds of water application before this darkens down and you would be able to make entry into that room.
I can't imagine if that is the only room on fire. If there's not a big extension to other rooms, I can't imagine it taking more than 5 seconds to knock that down with the spray. Yep. So I agree with you, but still, I mean, you would still get, and I've done a lot of videos on it. But on when you put a fog nozzle through the window and put it in a fog, there's still air entrainment. Yep. But it's not to the same extent. Much less than it is if you put it outside and blocking it totally. So again, I would go to spray also because it's just so much faster to get that blackened down so that you can. Because if you are affected by that, you can instantly start breaking windows after that if you get a knockdown in the fire. No, I'm good with that.
So part of the thing for our guys is to think about what information they would communicate. That's going to be significant to the later arriving resources and that command officer that's coming as to what's the nature of the problem that they have. And we have a fairly standard format that they indicate that they're there. What is the circumstances that they have? So in this case, they're on scene of a small 2-story apartment complex at a working fire, floor 1, Bravo side and unit, stretching an attack line on side Alpha for fire control. Will be in the offensive strategy, and in name the incident, because we operate on a single frequency, so we could have other incidents going on at the same time. So we give it a name. Usually that's the name of the street. And then if we required any additional resources, then we would indicate that, or that we're fine with the level of resources that we have. Specific actions that the company officer would take immediately on arrival and exiting the apparatus. One expectation would be, as they've pulled up and probably pulled a little bit past this place, they've seen everything except for the back. So I would expect that while the firefighter was stretching the hose line to whack the fire, that the company officer would quickly go around to the back and see what's going on back there. Is there fire coming from windows? Is there just smoke? Can they see the occupant? Is there any other information they get from back there? And then come around to join the firefighter to make entry and control the fire and get that primary search.
So, and I agree. I think that one of the things that I've been trying to kind of work with is that the 360 the initial 360 doesn't have to be the company officer doing, at least in my context. That at least it's that somebody does it. Mm-hmm. Depending on what are the most important things to do. Like a lot of cases, there's somebody meeting up, and the company officer has to like interview that person, like what happened, what's happening, and during that time, if the company officer is like tied to a person, needs to interview for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it might be, or something else that happens, someone is divided, somebody has the responsibility to do the 360 initial look in the backside if it's possible. Mm-hmm. So in our context, I've been trying to work with system for fire people, of course, where everyone has their duties, and one of the duties would be to do 360, but that's with different purposes. So there could be 360 for looking for fire, but it could also be 360 looking for vent openings. It can be in 360 looking for people. You gotta have a look at what's the reason for doing a 360. And sometimes one person could do everyone, but sometimes if you let's say as a company officer, I could assign one of firefighters saying that, well, take a dry chem extinguisher. Let's say you arrived at that fire, but you didn't see fire on the first floor. There's a closed window, but you maybe see smoke coming from the backside. So you see maybe there's an opening on the backside that you can get some suppressant in. So you would assign a firefighter, run to the backside, take a dry chem with you, see if you can find the fire, and do something about it in a quick manner. That firefighter will go run onto the backside, and that would be part of the 360. When they report back to me as a company officer, they would say, well, there wasn't any fire in there. There's smoke coming from a window, but I can't see any fire there, so it's basically useless to use a dry chem extinguisher in that window. Now I have like a bit of information that I use to build my own situational awareness as a company officer. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, maybe I'm standing there interviewing a person. So to split that up into like a certain portion of thing, a certain number of things has to be done at arrival, but it's not necessarily the case that it has to be the company officer doing a number of them. I think a lot of things can be delegated towards firefighters, for instance.
Well, and that also depends on how many firefighters you have. If you have 5, it's a little different than if you have 3.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you don't have a choice. The firefighter goes to whack the fire in this case, and the company officer goes out the other side. That's a no-brainer. So I don't have any problem.
Now the other part of that is the update report that comes after. When you go have a look at the back, you now have some more information. You get out of the rig and you encountered the mom who said that which is a little further down. Yeah, there we go. As you do your 360, you encounter an injured female occupant of the fire unit that states that her daughter's inside a bedroom in the back of the unit. And you observe it's 2 stories on side Charlie, has no basement. There's one window that's open, bidirectional air track, moderate volume of smoke exiting the top, air coming in the bottom. And you look at the window, you can't see the reported victim. So you don't know exactly where inside the back of that unit the little girl might be, or she might have left there. I mean, you don't know that.
Yeah.
So there's an update report that we would give that would communicate that information. And one of the things with that is that there are times, if this is a bigger building, if it was not an end unit, it was a middle unit, then you might not get around to the backside because of time.
Yeah.
In which case, you would simply say no 360 because of building size, because of a fence, because of a mean dog, whatever it may be. So that lets that incoming command officer know, I haven't got to this yet. Somebody probably ought to do this, and we'll have to get somebody to do it later in the incident. So definitely, one of the challenges that could be encountered in this case, and I've seen it in a residential fire, is where the occupant is trying to get back inside to save their child, and they have to be physically restrained so that they don't go back inside the fire. So if the company officer gets tied up with that, now that creates a further problem.
Would you? There's a bunch of questions here. Let's take the last one we said. Like, first off, it's an interesting question. I haven't thought about it before. But it's a kind of hypothetical question. Like, if you were that person standing on the outside, would you like the firefighters to restrain you from going inside?
Well, I probably wouldn't. It wouldn't necessarily be rational, but
that was just a curious question. Like, if a firefighter would try to keep me from going inside and fetch my baby, I would just knock him. I'd be violent. there would be violence. And the second question is just, do they have the right to restrain that person?
Well, I think that they do. If the actions that if the person is going to take is going to result in further injury to themselves, then yeah, we would have the right to do that.
I don't think Swedish firefighter. I can't answer that. I don't know.
I would much prefer that law enforcement be there and take care of that for me. But the incident that I'm thinking of, the woman that was outside was the grandmother of the child that was trapped inside, and the battalion chief, he restrained her in a very friendly way. He put his arm around her, and he was probably 100 pounds heavier than she was, and he just hugged her really tight and explained to her that the firefighters were going to go in and get her granddaughter, and held on to her to make sure that she didn't try and go help them. You would be a slightly different occupant than the grandmother.
Well, I mean, no, it was a short question. We're just going to dig into this one, but it was just a hypothetical question, like, do they have the right to do so and so on? And I honestly don't know in the Swedish system if the firefighters could have that right to do that.
In a way, it's kind of like if you were to be driving across a bridge, or you get sent to a despondent person that's on a bridge threatening to jump off, and you prevented them from doing that. It's sort of the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, although we're taught not to do that, we're taught not to physically hinder anyone to take their own lives. Then that's a whole different thing, because it's about how you.
Different discussion for different
discussion. Yeah, because there's a lot of firefighters respond, at least in my area and a lot of Sweden, respond to suicidal persons as first responders, and we're taught not to physically, like you see on videos, like people like physically grabbing people from jumping and so on, and that we're taught not to do that because it's counterproductive. Because the people have to make their own decision not to jump. If you force them to not jump, you kind of solidifies in their brain that they're going to jump in a later occasion, which is what science kind of tells. I've been taught that that's what the science says. If you physically restrain them from jumping, they will jump later or kill themselves later, because you prevented them from killing themselves. You didn't help them. Separate discussion, not my area of expertise. Anyway, going back to, we have more questions here. So that about that third 360, and you hear about that information that there might be a child last reported backside on that house. You find that window, bidirectional air track, smoke coming out, no fire in there, but smoke coming out. So would you change your first assignment? Would you because another option would that be to say, well, like stop with that initial fire attack on the front side, A side, let go of that hose line, take the company officer and the firefighter, go around on the back side, do a vent enter search, vent enter isolate search, whatever you want to call it, jump into that window and do a quick search of that whatever room is on the Charlie side. Those, I mean, there would be two initial options: continue with the fire attack, with the goal of entering as soon as fire attack is completed, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or go to the backside and jump in through the window. Would that be the two primary options you have?
Yeah, I think that would probably be the two choices, and you know, I think that again, part of the challenge there is if you don't control the fire, things are going to get worse. On the other hand, if the child was right there inside the window, then that could be a very speedy way to solve the problem. I think that really where this raises the level of challenge is you only have 3 people and you have to pick one.
Oh yeah, but to me it's interesting. It doesn't matter if it's New York coming there with 50 people. It's still an interesting discussion to see what has the highest priority in that case. Is it the fire attack because of the argument being if you knock the fire down, maybe that kid has gone into a different room, and if you don't control that fire, they will die anyway. Like that could happen, of course. Or if the other argument would be, well, if you do jump in from the backside, and if the kid was there, you'll save them and faster than doing the fire attack and then searching. I don't think.
And you won't know until it's done.
No, you won't know until it's done. And I would definitely go for fire attack. But I understand, like, you could have that argument saying that, well, the last reported place that the kid was in was that room, and it seems viable since it's only a bidirectional air track, no flames and so on. So maybe it's viable to jump in and search that room. I haven't seen videos and photos on the backside, but let's say it's viable. You jump in there, do a search. If you can't find them, at least that was like you gave it an honest try, but now you've reduced, like, now you've let the fire do what the fire does for 3, 4, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it takes to do that VES. I would go for fire attack, absolutely. Fire attack and then vent the building massively. But yep. I understand the other argument.
Yep. No, I think I would take the same approach that you would. That you know, control the fire, vent, and get the search done, because you don't know. Again, it's not a big place. There's not a lot of rooms back there, but again, if you put the fire out, things are going to get better. And if you have
a room on the backside and the kid prior to that walked into another room, well, the fire may be to the point, it seemed to burn pretty well in that room, so probably extending into the center of the house or that
yep.
apartment, and so you're probably going to be restricted in your search by that fire in that hallway or whatever it might be in the center of the house. So I think that if you don't do fire attack, I think you will be very restricted at if the kid is not in that backside room in Charlie's side, you've lost your chance of saving it.
Now, again, I think there's some differences too. If you go to the back and you see that there's no smoke in the windows, you can see the curtains, and there's maybe only a little bit of smoke at the top, and the doors are close to those rooms. That's a totally different dynamic in a couple of ways. One is that if the kid's behind a closed door, then it could very well be that they'll be fine till you get done fire attack. Or you could go into the room and again, there's a barrier between you and the child, and you could take them out the window, and that's probably better than taking them out to the fire compartment. So I think there's some different dynamics, and what we don't know is exactly what was going on in the back. I made this up about the window because I didn't have any video or pictures, but I did see some smoke coming up from the back of the building, so I was guessing that there was at least some smoke coming out of windows back there. No,
that's the interesting. I mean, again, I wouldn't have a big problem with someone saying you can't do, well, technically you could do vent enter search in the Swedish system. If there was smoke though, like if there was, like you said here, you would have to bring a hose line. It would be like an interior attack through that window. You have to be 5 persons basically. You have 2 firefighters inside, 1 at the door, in that case the window, pump operator and the officer. But if there was, like you said in the other scenario, if you see a closed window, you see there's only like smoke in there, probably the door is closed, you could jump in there, as in by the Swedish legislation also do, with 2 firefighters without a hose line, because it's not a lot of smoke, because that's the borderline for us. Is if it's a lot of smoke, potential for fire, you would have to have a hose line. If there's no smoke, or no potential for fire, or a small potential fire, you can go in without. But taking that aside, I don't have a big problem with people jumping into that window, do a VEIS. Especially, of course, if you're more units, you would do that in the same time.
Yeah.
Boom, problem solved. But that's the easy argument about saying we can do both. The hard one is choosing, and like you said, I would do fire attack, because as soon as we have a fire attack, we probably have within 5-10 seconds of applying water there, we can massively break every window in there, put a fan on, blow everything out, and drastically increase the search time. Drastically decrease the search times.
And increase the safety of the environment to bring the person out there.
Yeah. And also, I mean, as soon as you start breaking those windows after you have fire contact, you will start dropping in poisonous gases levels and increasing chances of rescuing that kid also. Even though that maybe it takes a little bit longer time to actually find them. During that period of time, you're decreasing the toxic levels, the toxic gases in there, the level of toxic gases in there.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in this case, I don't know that I wouldn't change their assignment. I think get water on the fire and make that attack, and then the primary search would be, I'd stick with that plan.
Let's say a magic wand here. There wouldn't be any second engine here. You would only have 3 firefighters, and you did that. And so they do the fire attack. They get good knockdown. You got blackout of the fire. There wasn't any big extension further into the house, the apartment. So you have great knockdown on that fire attack. What would you say would be the switching point now when you say, well, we've done with fire attack, let's switch to primary search, and maybe assisted them with ventilation and so on. But like, how do you judge, or how would you teach when it is safe or recommended, or whatever you might say, to stop that fire attack?
I guess
would blackdown be like a point of reference?
Yeah, I would probably say that if they've knocked down any significant visible flame that they can see in there, then that would be the point where they would need to switch and start getting after that primary search, particularly if they had no other company there.
Let's say if you alter the universe a little bit, say that was not a fire that extended to the outside. That was an interior attack. It could be just through the first room, very close to it, but an interior attack nonetheless, going into a room. From the outside, there's no visible flame, but you go into the fire compartment, there's visible flame, you knock it down, you do blackout there, and you get blacked down. You don't see any visible flames anymore. But there is, in that case, the potential, because there's very bad visibility inside an interior attack, that wasn't the bulk of the fire. There might be more fire further back in. Would you still say that, well, if you think that you've knocked down what you thought was the main body of fire, now you're good to go to search? Or would you have some other criteria that you will have to search the main hallway to see if there's any more rooms on fire or something else before you switch to search?
I guess the thing that may make it a little simpler for our guys is that they typically would search off a hose line. So they're going to take that hose line with them.
Anyway,
you know, they would probably stop at the door. If the doorway is open, they would probably stop to another room. They would stop at the doorway. One of them would go in and search that room. The other would stay at the doorway with the nozzle. So again, small rooms. It's a fairly small apartment. The distance from front to back is not very great. The rooms are not very large. So I think it would be fairly quick for them to determine whether or not they had fire anyplace else inside the rooms. You know, again, if they needed to clear some smoke, they could always do that with some hydraulic ventilation. That would be reasonably quick, and they don't need any other tools to do that other than what they have. So, you know, I guess once they darken the fire down in this case, because they have some specific information, would be to stretch the line to the back of the unit and see if they can locate the child. If they encounter fire, they'll deal with it.
Yeah, and that sounds to me very reasonable. Why I'm asking is, like, there's also this breaking point where you say, well, if you have like a default position that we don't vent before we have control over the fire, which a lot of people would at least nowadays agree that it's a basic, if you have a guideline, that should be a very nice guideline. You know, yeah. And you don't vent until you have control of the fire. You have like defined control over the fire, and we've talked about this before, Ed. We talked about it in Vigo, for instance. Like, and I struggled with this because, like, defining control over fire to not make it too I don't know if we call it rigid or too. It's very hard to design a control over fire condition that's works on the fire ground. That's not too slow. For instance, if our objective is to fire attack, then switch over to rescue, and in that process, switching over to rescue, we want to do massive ventilation to support that rescue and to support that search. We need to have that condition, and that condition can't be too slow. Like if you have a condition saying, well, all flaming combustion needs to be suppressed before you can switch over to ventilation, then becomes too stiff. It becomes too slow because it can take a lot of time to suppress all the pockets of fire that could be inside a fire compartment or whatever. But if you vent too early, of course, if you have too much flames, you may make it worse for everyone. So you find that borderline, and what I kind of, one of the arguments, or one of the things I settled with was a temperature reading of the smoke. Like around 100, 150 degrees Celsius, which would be like 200, 300 degrees Fahrenheit or something. Like if you have those kind of temperatures, meaning that if you raise your hand above your head and it's like wicked hot, like if you expose maybe the backside of your glove and you raise it up, it's like wicked hot. Maybe not enough. We haven't taken the temperature down to the point where I'm safe to be ventilating. Or if you have any flames that are above like 50 centimeters from the ground, like 2 feet off the ground. Like if you have only small flames, like go vent. But if you have tall, big flames, don't vent. Suppress them, then vent. Like those kind of conditions. What's your like thoughts of that? Because a lot of people go like, well, that's too much detail, Lars. That you can't teach firefighters that. I go like, why? What I've taught when I was at fire school was like, well, it's like everyone else. We vent when you have control over the fire, and nobody tells you what control over the fire is. And that becomes
yeah. You know, I guess the part of the thing with that, I would agree with you. I didn't give people a height of the flame, but if the bulk of the flame has been suppressed, yes, you're going to have to overhaul. You're going to have to check for extension and things like that.
It's a devil's advocate. I will just go like, what do you mean with bulk of the flame?
less than 50 centimeters.
well, well, that's the problem, right? Then someone will go,
Yeah.
well, 50 centimeters, like how long of a flame? Like if you have 50 centimeters on the TV, or is it 50 centimeters if you have 50 centimeters of flame during the entire house? Like,
I guess the thing is, in trying to picture it in my mind is that it's quite possible you're going to have smoldering cushion on the couch or some things like that. And given the fact that you don't have great visibility, you may not be able to see all of that. But I think the issue of that you've cooled the smoke, you've extinguished the flames that you can see. You don't have any indication that you're still in that vent limited condition. Then in this particular instance, I think that it's probably is very reasonable to begin the process of ventilation. I think it makes perfect sense.
oh, absolutely. And I mean, I don't want to overcomplify it, oversimplify it, or overcomplicate things. It's easier. Like if I would take a magic wand and say like that scenario we talked about, there's no person reported. It's only fire tech. Like we know magic wand, we know nobody's inside. In that case, I would say, well, defined fire control would be no open flames, meaning no flaming combustion you can see, and temperature of the fire gases or smoke above your head in the main connecting pieces of the house. Like if you're in a one-story house, that would be in the hallway of the first floor. Mm-hmm. That would be if the temperature of the smoke in that area is around 100, 150 degrees Celsius, 200, 300 degrees Fahrenheit. I would say that if you had those two conditions met, just vent away. Just the likelihood of something going bad in that occasion, in that situation, is very small to me. If you have a two-story house, you have to go up to the second story and do that, like in the main hallway, connecting spaces up in there. If you do the same temperature check of the smoke with your hand or with your tick, there's a bunch of problems with that. We can talk about that some other time. But anyway, if you do that temperature check and you find that, well, we don't have any high temperatures either, again, I would say that that's a safe place. You start venting. Now, the problem comes in when we have persons reported or possibly victims inside, when we need to make that faster. We want to, we don't want to make it unsafe. That's not the thing, because unsafe is unsafe for everyone, even the victims. But we want to make it faster. So we take, lack of a better word, I don't like it, but we take more risks, or we, the chance of success. We'll say that the chance of success is lower, meaning that we can have potentially a fire that's building up again if we vent a little bit too early. But in that case,
well,
I would say,
yeah, one of the other things in this particular instance, if the Krug is into that first room, which I'm guessing, that's probably the living room and it's connected directly to the kitchen. And then the bedrooms are off that space. So my sense of it would be as if you darken the fire down in that front room, and then you continued your stretch. If you encountered the child in that back bedroom, when you stretch back there's nothing saying you can't close the door and take the window in that room and vent that space. That space didn't have a fire.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
And in that case, it could be that the lowest risk to the child might be to take the window and pass them out the window to your pump operator.
Oh, absolutely. And those are things like there's always these, like when you try to teach firefighters, and sometimes you really have to go, you don't have a lot of time. And there's always this ifs and buts that come forward. Like, well, what if they do this? Or, but if I do this? So you try to design like simplistic way of looking at, like, tactically, how do you deal with fire? Like fire control. How do you define that? And it's go like, well, you can vent if there's an isolation between you and the fire. Like if there's a door closed between you and the fire, like you said, you can close that door and take them out another way. And then someone goes, but what if there's 2 doors to that room and you didn't know about the other door because there was a lot of smoke? You go like, well, yeah, in that case, it might be a problem, because if you close that door and there's another one open, you open that window, now you created an air track. And then you can go like, well, if that would make the fire bigger, it doesn't really matter that much initially, and probably you would notice it after 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute that was going on, because you would have a lot better visibility in that room, because you would have an air track going back and forth in a secondary compartment. You would get better visibility. But there's always this ifs and buts. The what
Infinitely.
The what if
Infinite.
game. But
Yeah,
the what
infinite.
if game is important, of course. We're playing it right now.
I mean, it's like one of the things in our ventilation doctrine is that the crew that's doing fire attack, and they darken the fire in a room, that they can begin the process of ventilation with hydraulic ventilation, without having to overcomplicate things, because they're controlling the energy that's being added to the smoke. They're right there. They have a hose line. They pay attention to what's going on around them. If the fire starts to light up again, you stop ventilating and you put water on the fire. Whereas other types of ventilation, where you're making openings remote from the fire and putting a fan at the door and so forth, if you don't have control of the fire, now you're going to make things a lot worse. So I think a lot of it is about kind of people having a picture in their head of what their actions are going to do to the fire, and kind of a common understanding of the people who are operating on the fire ground as to how are we going to go about this in general terms.
Would it be a case? Let's say in that case, the 3 firefighters. Let's say that was an interior attack on that fire. The firefighter and the company officer went inside. They did fire attack. They darkened the fire down. Since that is the company officer, I would assume that they have the right to say that, well, let's start ventilating this fire compartment.
Yep.
In my case, it would be a little bit different, because the officer is never inside. So the officer is on the outside. And going back to 5 years, and at most fire departments today, it would still be that the firefighter is inside, regardless of what the officer on the outside, not regardless of what they said, but generally the decision would be on the firefighters to decide if they ventilate that fire compartment or not.
Yep.
And I'm trying to move away from that, because I'm saying that, well, that's a whole different issue about what the officer should and should not do. But basically it would be that the officer has to take the responsibility to make sure that the outside also looks good. Like, do we have fire extinction to a different compartment? Do we have other windows coming a lot of fire and smoke from other windows? Like, what the interior firefighters can see on the inside is only maybe their fire compartment. They can have, with a tick and look around. It's like we've knocked it down here, but they don't have visibility to other compartments. So there has to be someone on the outside giving a second opinion, saying that, well, basically, if the ones on the inside says, well, hey, we want to ventilate, and there's someone on the outside says, well, looking good from where I'm standing, now we have 2 points of reference in saying that we're not doing anything stupid. And I'm trying to have the decision for ventilation to be decided by the officer. Now, ideally, I would say in the Swedish context, the officer on the outside would look, when the fire attack is going on, the fire officer on the outside would look at the building and go like, well, is there anything here that makes me hesitant that the firefighters on the inside can start ventilating as soon as they can? In most cases, it will say, like, there's nothing contradicting that piece of information. So the officer will radio into the firefighter saying, well, whenever you have control of the fire on the inside, you have the authority to start ventilating. Hydraulically to start off with, which is a perfect way.
Yep.
Like to have that 2 point of references. There was a in the course in Vigo was a Dutch firefighter who showed a model of, no, it was a Spanish firefighter. Yeah, Spanish firefighter. So showed a model of, like, it was three rings that joined together. It's just a model that, like the Olympic rings, but just 3 of them. So there was a ring here, There's a circle is the right word. Circle here, and a circle there. And there was a like this is the worldview of the interior crew. This is the worldview of the officer on the outside, and some of that they have the shared view. Like
Yep.
some of that both know, some of that the officer know, and then there you have the third circle was reality. Like there's bits and pieces where reality meets where the officer and firefighter knows, but there's also a big part of the reality that nobody knows, or maybe just the officer knows, or maybe just the firefighter. So by having the 2-point references, for instance, for ventilation, which is a critical task, to have the 2 points of references, one inside, one outside, you at least reduce the likelihood of someone starting breaking windows when you really shouldn't.
I was writing that down.
Oh, the circles?
I like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah, it was a perfect model. I was like, that's awesome. I think maybe it was Spanish or Dutch. Sorry. And if you're listening who made me that model, I'm sorry. I don't remember who gave it to me. But it's good. So again, 2-point references, and that's why I'm trying to get that back, because the officers in Sweden, I'm ranting a little bit when I'm saying this, but the officers in Sweden have pretty much go like, well, you should go in here to the firefighters, and the firefighters go inside, and they kind of solve everything magically on the inside. And the officer pretty much reacts to what the firefighters are doing and helps them, supports them, but they kind of let go of the decision power and gave it to the firefighters, which wasn't a great idea to my mind.
Yeah, for us it's a little bit different. They've got a little window of action that they can do ventilation wise, but it is limited to that space that they're in. A lot of times the window is out anyway because it's already failed if there's a significant fire in there. But as far as discontinuing door control, putting a fan on, increasing ventilation in other areas, remote from the fire, all of that for us would be determined by the IC.
Which I totally agree with. That's how it should be. Now I'm not like there's the opposite type of the wheel where you go like saying, well, you don't give any decision power on the firefighters. Like there's some systems in the world where basically the fire officers basically stand there and point, direct the stream that direction, direct the stream that direction. The firefighter won't take any decisions at all, almost. And then you've gone, of course, too far. You need to have like a clear boundary where, for instance, as a firefighter, you can decide about these things. Like if you do an exterior fire attack, you decide what kind of stream it is, what kind of angle it is, how long you're flowing, and so on. But you can't decide if you're going to do an exterior attack or not, maybe, or so and so on. So I don't think that's strange, but it's hard to decide sometimes what is the appropriate level of who can take this decision, and what are the boundaries for taking that decision.
Agreed.
Does Blue Card help you a lot with that?
I think it does. One of the things with assignments that you provide is that you give people the task, the location, and the objective. So you say, stretch an attack line off engine 1 for fire control in the unit directly above the or fire control and check for extension directly above the fire unit. What they do when they go up there to check for extension and to control the fire and to deal with that, that's on them. But they know what the objective is. The objective is you're going to go up there and you're going to search that unit. You're going to check to see if any fire extended up into that area. So it really kind of communicates to people what the commander's intent is. So if you run into some kind of an obstacle or something, if you can overcome that, that's great. If you can't, then that's bad news. You need to communicate that back. So I think that the system, as long as everybody is on the same page with that, and they know what the standard plays are, then you can call the play, and they know what's expected, and they know what the parameters are around that particular play.
Yeah, and I really like that. I like that it's been too. The Swedish system has become too not anarchy, but this, like what you say, like those playbook when you have a definitely you kind of let's settle before this is the play, like, and the officer goes like, now it's this play, then everybody knows, and then you can make small changes to that one. But it's very easy to change anything if you know exactly what you should do. And like, we're gonna do this play, but we'll do it with this twist.
Yep.
But like, it's very fast way of giving orders and so on. So I really like it. But we are really not good at it in the Swedish fire service, I would say. Some firefighters think that they are, but they're really not. Okay, let's move on. Let's say, well, what more questions do we have for this?
Next one is what tactical assignment you'd give the next driving company. And I think that, in this particular case, you've already got an injured person that's outside. Hopefully the pump operator can help them to a limited extent. But assuming that we're able to quickly knock the fire down and locate the child, then that next driving company is probably going to end up getting tasked with taking care of the injured people. If we had another resource, an ambulance or something there that could take care of that, then my thought would be getting them into the unit directly above where the fire is. Because given the type of construction that we've got in this building, if you get a significant fire in there, it's likely that there's going to be some extension that could get up into that unit that's directly above.
Let's say we roll back the tape and say that, well, if the first crew is still doing fire attack and and they switched over to search,
yep,
but they haven't found the kid yet. Would that make a difference? Would you send in the next engine as a secondary search team?
I don't know that I would, given the size of the unit. I mean, it's a very small unit with very small rooms.
Yeah.
That's a possibility, but again, I would guess that unless that first crew encountered a problem with the fire attack and they had to stay on fire attack because the fire was burning in a void space and they were having to deal with that, in that case I would assign them to primary search in the fire unit. But if the first crew was successful at quickly knocking the fire down, it was just a contents fire, I would probably not send another company in there because they would just be plugging the space up and making it more difficult to work.
And I agree with that, especially if I agree with that on the premises that there is no I agree on that on the premises that there on the outside there is people that, depending on how injured they are, if they are injured in a way that they need immediate medical attention, that makes perfect sense. If there is likelihood or risk of extension with smoke to the unit above, that makes perfect sense to send them there instead, because that's a life hazard risk too. Now, magic wand, I'll take away. There's no need for life safety on the outside. No injured person needing treatment on the outside, and there's no risk of extension. Let's just have this magic wand here again. In that case, it would be possible that I would send them in anyway, and try to maybe have them climb in through the back door and do like vent enter search from the backside. Depending on the situation, but because why I would do this is simply having the argument with myself. If I were standing on the outside as a parent and my kid was in there, and I saw firefighters doing other things like checking extension to the attic or connecting to a hydrant, whatever I would question, like, why are they not in there searching for my kid? And so it would be a question of if I would really have to think that the added second crew into that occupancy would really make it more inefficient. Like if one crew is 100%, and if I send in a second crew, that the total percentage of that search would go down to 80%. In that case, it would of course be a big failure. But if you're at 100%, I don't expect it to go up to 200% if we send in another crew, but maybe it'll go to 120, 150% efficiency of searching that space. I don't know.
Now the other wrinkle that comes into this is once I get another crew, then I no longer can operate with 2 in 1 out. I have to have 2 in 2 out, and there's only 2 people in that other crew. So one of the things that they would be doing is they would be, regardless, other than providing emergency medical care to people that are outside, they were going to do either of those other 2 things. They would be stretching the tack line off that first fire engine, and they would probably hit the pause button in the on deck position at the doorway, because that's part of the deal with this 2 in 2 out requirement is I can only use 2 in 1 out with a single crew. Once I add another crew to that, now 2 in 2 out applies. So the way that we deal with that is with an on deck company. Now again, the thing with that is if the first company was still in there doing fire control or search, that on deck company would provide door control that help advance a hose line for them. They'd be in position to take the child if they found the child and brought them out. So it puts them in a pretty useful spot. And then once I get another company, then they would move to an interior assignment.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, again, do those restrictions, and the same would be from Sweden. If we have 5 people, we can't go in with 2 teams. It's only 2 firefighters inside. There's got to be basically 2 out also, and you would have to be 7 then to have 2 teams inside. So you have 4 firefighters inside. You still have 1 door person, and then you have an officer and a pump operator. So you would have to be 7 to actually do that, which is typically not how it's done in Sweden. Is most fires are extinguished or dealt with by the first arriving engine, and they are 5. So in Swedish, you would never ever find. It's very rare that you find 2 crews inside at the same time. It's typically only 1. To the extent that, and this is a problem because that is so common. That is the norm. That's how we train. That's how we do everything. To the point at where I was standing at like we did trainings for the whole region. So there was we had a drill. There was a fire on the first floor of a house with a separate entrance. There was a fire on the second floor, separate entrance. So basically two units, 2 apartments, you could say. And the first arriving engine went to the first floor, did fire attack and search, and the second arriving engine went to the second floor, did search and fire attack. But the twist was the first floor was very easy. There was very quickly that they knocked the fire down, and the search was done like 3 minutes tops because it was light smoke. It was like super easy. So then they moved out. And we were curious about seeing how many of those ICs were going to send in the second search team up here, or would they just stand outside doing nothing, or would they look for extension to the attic? And it was basically a very clear answer. Pretty much nobody of the ICs we had there sent in the second crew on the second floor to assist with search. It wasn't just a tiny unit. It was a fair-sized unit, and that was very reflective of how we trained our Swedish fire officers. One unit, 1 crew, like regardless of whatever. So they would position the other one as like a wait until the first crew on the second floor would run out of air, and then send them in as a replacement, or they would go up and search for extension in the attic. And when you ask them, you go like, why did you do that? And they say, well, they have the reasons for it. We'll need to check for extensions. We need to make sure that when they come out, they have replacement. And I was saying, well, you're basically waiting 10 minutes on the outside to make sure that whoever was alive in the occupancy on the second floor was absolutely dead, before you send in the new crew to search, instead of having two crews on the same floor searching, maybe one right hand search pattern, one left hand search pattern. But it was a question that never came up, which is again very telling of how we've trained the Swedish fire officers, which is like one crew, one occupancy, one crew, one occupancy, one crew, which is true for like 95% of the fires, because there's no time to get a second crew in there. It's done. And meanwhile, I go to, I'm ranting off here, but I was at a training at a fire department. It was a large fire department. I was doing container training. I was just there watching. I was in the SCBA. It was one of my first experiences actually being inside a major department in the United States. And we went in for the first engine crew, went to the fire attack, and I followed the engine crew in, did the fire attack, and then the first truck came in, and then they started moving along the hose line up to the fire attack crew, and there was like a meeting in there. Oh, are you the fire attack crew? Yeah, the fire attack crew. We're the truck company. We're gonna start searching from the hose line back, and then they did that, and then the second engine crew come in, and then the second truck company came in. There was like 10 people inside there. It was a very small container system, so there was people everywhere, and everybody was asking everybody, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Where are you? Where are you gonna go? Where's the captain? Who are you? Are you the captain?" It was just a mess. It was that was my first experience practically with having like many crews inside a small occupancy. And I think that there's a happy medium there. It's not true that Swedish like only one crew, one occupancy all the time. And I don't think it's good to cram in like 10 people inside an apartment with no visibility, because the communication problem and like it becomes massive.
Big issue.
Yeah, you don't have that problem. I don't have it either in Swedish context, that we don't have enough manpower to put that many people inside.
Yeah, and again, I've worked in both contexts where, you know, I had all career staff companies, and we'd get 5 engines in a truck and 2 chiefs on an apartment fire, and I've worked here where I have 2 or 3 or 4 people that get there right away, and then it takes a while for the rest of the help to arrive. And it's a very different coordination challenge. With the resources that I have now, it's an issue of you can only do one thing. You best pick the one that's going to have the biggest impact. If you have multiple resources, then it's a matter of, okay, I can do 3 or 4 things at once. How do I now coordinate that so that they're done in an appropriate way that supports one another and doesn't cause a problem? So it's just two different sorts of problems.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, and I know that and I think many of the other fire officers in Sweden are not good at the coordination piece here, because we're not very used to that one. Mm-hmm. In contrast, we are fairly good at prioritizing, picking the best option, but we're not good at coordination.
Well, I think you know, and you know, talking with a lot of guys here in the U.S., I think that you know, if you take somebody from a large agency that's very has a lot of resources, and they're used to dealing with, you know, companies arriving one right after the other and so forth, and then you put them in the context where no, you only get one, and that's all you're going to have for a while, and then maybe you're going to get some more. They struggle with that, and the same thing holds true if I was to take a good fire officer from my organization and give them an incident as the initial incident commander with Seattle's resources. They too would struggle because it's just a very different pace and a different dynamic because of the timing and the number of resources that are involved. So I think both of them have challenges. It's just a matter of which one are you most used to working in? What's your norm?
How much of the problems when you see people discussing tactics online and fire technical panel, how much of those problems do you think have a root in different worldview when it comes to staffing and manpower? Like, man.
Oh, I think there's a fair bit of it that does. Um, um, in most cases, many firefighters and fire officers in the United States, they get hired by an agency and they stay there for their entire career. And in a lot of cases, um, particularly I think in some larger organizations, they don't necessarily have a lot of contact with the outside world. So however it is that they do it, where they come from, that's what's normal. And we try and get our guys out a little bit, so that they get exposed to some different things, so that they see that there's more than one way that you can come at this. It's not always a matter of right and wrong. It sometimes is a matter of how many resources do you have, and how many things can you do at once, and what kind of tools and training do you have. And there is some right and wrong, I think, as well. But um, there's also a lot.
If you have 200
Yep.
firefighters, you still have to make the first order and second order and third
Yep.
order. So there's always
Yep.
you have to
Yep.
always decide what's the most important thing to do now.
Yeah. What are you going to do first?
Yeah. So that problem. It's just that the consequences of picking the wrong one is not as great.
Hmm.
Like so. Okay, I got like 10 minutes more, so we have to jump ahead and wrap this up. I need to pick
Okay.
up my kid at kindergarten.
Okay. Um, the eighth question about given the option to operate with two in, one out, is this an acceptable risk based on conditions in a report of an occupant trapped in a building? I would say yes. Um,
Why
Again,
would you
it's
say
not.
yes?
Why would I say yes? Because I think that the fire conditions are such, as we discussed earlier. If I can darken this fire down in 10 seconds, and the distance that I have to travel from the front of this unit to the back of this unit is 30 feet or so, 10 meters, then the risk to the firefighters going in and darkening the fire down and doing a search of those rooms in the back, I think is not great. I mean, yes, they're going into a smoke-filled environment. They're going into a building that's on fire. That has some inherent risk to it. But I think that this is a controllable situation with the number of people that we have, the resources that we have available. Even if we were operating just with tank water, I think we have enough capability to control this fire and make this an environment that we can operate in.
And I agree. I don't see a problem, given the fact that you can control that fire, which should
Yeah.
be like the
I mean,
condition.
if we had 3 or 4 units off, and one of them supposedly had somebody in it, and there were flames coming out every opening, no, I don't think that's the same circumstance. But in this case here, it appears that we've got a fire in one room, probably the largest room in the unit, and we've got a couple of other rooms, probably a couple of bedrooms and a bathroom that are going to need to be searched. And again, with the resources we have on hand, I think that we can deal with that portion of it pretty quickly. If the fire is extended to the unit above or into some void spaces and the like, no, this is going to take some more help. But I think this immediate problem can be safely addressed with the resources that we've got.
Would there be like if you were to increase the size of that occupancy? Let's say it's still the same type of structure, but you would increase the size of the occupancy. When, what conditions and factors would make you hesitant to actually send in 2 people without having to go out?
Yeah, I guess I would say in a garden apartment type of occupancy, I think that more often than not, if the fire is controllable with a single hose line and so forth, that I would say that's reasonable. If there was a fire on the first floor and extending to the second floor, and the person was trapped on the second floor, I would probably still commit people, but I wouldn't commit them to the second floor until until we got control of the first floor fire. I'd put the second company upstairs.
Makes total sense. I agree with that.
So anyway, the last couple of questions are based on some action that took place in the video, and I've got the screen grab of that. One of them was the exterior. This is before they made entry and conducted their interior attack and search. And one of the things that I don't know is I don't know if that fan is just sitting there or if the fan is running and pressurizing the building. It was difficult to tell from the video whether it was running or not. And then the other part was that one of the members, whoops, no, stop that. Oh. One of the members of the crew, and I can't tell whether it's the officer or a firefighter, is helping with the hose line, and it doesn't appear that they've got their protective clothing all in place, and they're not wearing a breathing apparatus. And they went into the building and are seen carrying the child out, again, with no breathing apparatus on. So that gives rise to a couple of questions. And one of them is kind of focusing on our ventilation doctrine as to whether or not you would use positive pressure ventilation. If so, what are the advantages and disadvantages of placing the fan at the door on the alpha side? And I guess with that, it really comes down to the when. You know, if you've got the fire knocked down and you don't have any significant combustion going on inside, maybe just a little bit of smoldering, and you want to clear that space quickly, taking a bunch of windows and putting a fan at the door is probably going to be an effective way to do that. But the reported location of the victim is on the back side, and the fire is on the front side, and putting the fan in that location, if things don't go well, you're introducing all of the products of combustion through the spaces where the occupant is likely to be. So I think there's some question as to whether or not that's the best plan of action, and I definitely would not do it until we did have some certainty of fire control.
So I agree. That totally. I mean, like I said, fire control we all discussed. That would be one key part of putting a fan there. But in my context, it would be likely that the only outlet we then have is in the fire compartment where the firefighters opened or the fire breached the window.
Yeah.
And in that case, it would make perfect sense to put a fan there to assist that smoke removal as fast as possible. Now, there is an off chance that there might be a secondary window open somewhere, and we actually get a secondary airstream going that direction, and that might push more products of combustion in that direction, which might make it worse for someone who we're trying to save. But I would say that's one of the things we go like, yeah, I'll take a calculated guess or chance or risk or whatever you want to call it. If that is the case, I'll live with that. Because for the vast majority of other occasions, we're going to greatly increase safety, and we're going to greatly increase the likelihood of somebody surviving by reducing toxins and increasing visibility to quick and search times for the rest of
the house. The other part of that is also thinking about the size of this unit and how long it's going to take to change the atmosphere in there.
Oh yeah, it's going to be fast.
If you open up enough windows, it's going to change very, very quickly. Less than 60 seconds probably for that environment to change substantially. Assuming that you have fire control, that may still be a viable option, even though you might have somebody in between where the fire was being the operative word and another outlet.
Yeah. I don't know, so I'm good with that as long basically seeing that as long as they had fire control before they put the fan there, I'm a happy camper.
Yep.
And then, and with the offset that if there wasn't any person inside, I would, as soon as they establish fire control, I would reduce the fan speed to like half or at minimum, to reduce the chance of pushing smolders and stuff like that into walls where it might be partially burned through and so on. But that's a secondary question that comes afterwards. We've established that there's nobody inside. And of course, we would do, I would assume most fire departments in Sweden also would have a fan in the exposure on the side, where to pressurize that compartment, but not ventilate, but to pressurize it.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last question that I asked is I think it's a pretty big deal. One member of the crew wasn't wearing a breathing apparatus, and subsequently they went inside, carried the child from going outside, and I think this kind of goes back to something that John McDonough said, that when there's persons reported, people forget everything that they ever knew. It's a very stressful situation. There's a tremendous amount of moral pressure to act. And, I know of an instance in our own organization where we had a fire with persons reported. It was a woman in a wheelchair. She was on the phone with dispatch, and she was losing consciousness. She was in a bedroom, but she couldn't get the door closed, and the fire was in the living room. She couldn't get out. And our engine company pulled up, and the crew came off. They stretched a line in. They knocked the fire down, grabbed the woman, and pulled her out. But they never gave an initial radio report that they were there. When I got there, I called the company officer on the radio. He didn't answer me because he had left his radio in the rig, and the like. And he said that it was very, very difficult because he had never encountered that situation before. And he was very stressed out. He knew that this was a very large occupant because we had been there before on medical calls and the like. So I guess the question here is really what do you do if you're the pump operator or you're the firefighter? And you see your officer forget to do something critical like this, how do you correct that? And again, I think it's critical. We practice this in other contexts. This concept of crew resource management is that everybody looks out for everybody else. So if they're not don't have their breathing apparatus on, then we need to point that out. We need to tell them, hey, get your mask on, even if it's your boss. Sometimes that's easier said than done.
I think for me, the interesting question here is like, if you have a situation where you do this, I got to go right now, but if you have a question like this, it's not about what they do in that moment. Like if there's somebody comes out, you're standing there without your SCBA, and they come out and hand you a baby in a very bad environment. Like you'll probably grab that baby and do it. You'll do that. The question is, of course, why didn't you have your SCBA on when they actually said, hey, take this baby? Which is the same. Like I don't question people doing the wrong thing at fires. I question, why didn't you have the training you required to do the right thing? Like the question is always, why did you end up in that? It's this question like, what if you arrive to a fire and just basically people hanging from the building. Let's take this magic wand and cause this massive chaos scene. And you arrive, so you don't have your mask on. Now it's going to take you 30 seconds to put your mask on and then grab all the babies that's flying everywhere. Like, if that's the scenario you look inside your head, you're going to go like, well, did we, by not having the mask on in the vehicle, set us up for failure when we arrive to the scene? Because at that point, nobody's going to take their mask on because they don't have time. They don't have 30 seconds, or at least they don't perceive to have 30 seconds. And the same goes with everything else. Like, if we're not setting ourselves up for the worst kind of scenario, we will, like you said, we will fail in the sense that we will break down into doing not what we're supposed to do. We'll do basically what we judge best for that moment because we're already behind. So if you if you build your organization up that we're going to maximize our performance to going to automatic fire alarms. Now that's just going to set our standard because that's what most of the fire calls we go to. Or you're going to fail at going to a real fire. And if you maximize going to a fire at the 80% of the fires we go to are like a non-issue. They're simple. There's food on the stove. There's TV on fire, whatever. We can handle those with any hose line. If you set our organization up for those 80%, you're going to fail at the 20%. And at some point you kind of go like, well, should we optimize for the 1%? Should we optimize for the 1% of a percent? Should we optimize for, like, what do you optimize for? And that's a hard question. Like there is a boundary there, because if you optimize for, we're going to optimize our every incident we go to, we're going to anticipate, like we're going to anticipate babies hanging from balconies and being thrown at us. If we optimize for that performance, I think that's a good thing in our head. We should optimize for that. But there are limitations to that. Like if you would have your SCBA on, you would have your mask on, you would have a lot of things because you need to be able to run into a very bad environment and catching kids falling from sky. But it doesn't necessarily add up, because at 80% of the fires are going to be very inefficient, or maybe 90% or 95% of the fires, because you kind of do everything get tweaked to handle that kind of a situation. Do you follow what I'm kind of saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like laying a supply line.
Yes. Well, oh, you tied that right back to where we started. It's awesome. Where I think like the line is that you should anticipate that there are being babies thrown from balconies, and you should have your mask on, and you should don't care about supply line.
Yeah.
Or you can have the same argument, of course, like if I anticipate to be in multiple compartments on fire, like a whole house, and I need to save the next house, and to do that I need a supply line.
So I think with this last question that is kind of wrap it up, is that there's two parts to this. One of them, as you pointed out, there's a system issue, which is, does this happen all the time? Did this guy not have training? Is there a system issue that needs to get dealt with, or is it simply that they were stressed by this particular event, and maybe a quick reminder by the pump operator, hey Cap, don't forget your breathing apparatus, might have been enough to get him to take a different path.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I agree with everything you said. Like there should be a friendly reminder goes all directions. Like you should really wear your BA for a lot of reasons, if not else for your own long-term health. But also because if you don't have your SB on your back, at least mask hanging, you're not ready to help your colleagues or help the trapped victims or whatever it might be.
Indeed.
Okay, so
all right.
I need to go.
Go get the little boss.
Yeah, I need to get the little boss.
And I got to go to work.
Yeah. Well, nice talking to you, Ed.
Okay, you too.
Talk later. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.